So hey, thanks for making the slushy walk up here. This weather is nasty. Wow. But I am super excited. Second day of our advocacy day. You guys, I gotta say, are killing it over on the hill over here. I'm telling you, there are people talking about, wow, there's housing people all over the place. I was in a couple meetings yesterday. You guys did great testifying last night as well. Got some cool late breaking news on the House side of things. Their committee substitute bill just went through the process yesterday to be introduced, and they raised the homeless assistance program funding up to $8.1 million yesterday, so that's good. It's a start. It's a start. I mean, we still have to go through the Senate and then the full ledge and the governor, you know, so we'll get there, but it's a good start. So, yes. A couple housekeeping notes before we get underway today. Let's keep on our advocacy stuff. Like, okay, let's start with this map over here. There's like 25 signatures on it, and I see more than 25 people here. So that's literally the easiest thing you can do. So take some time, just go over and just sign your name. It doesn't have to be right on your community. You can fill in a gap or whatnot. That'd be super helpful. Ballots in your folders, there's elections. Ballots, those are due by noon today to the desk over here. So make sure you get those in. We want to make sure all your votes count. And then also, as a reminder, we are doing the video testimonies downstairs today starting at 10 o'clock. Don't be scared or nervous about these. We're literally looking for like 30 seconds of like, here's why I think funding housing and homelessness programs is important. What do you see in your community? Maybe a 30-second success story. Anything, just do whatever you want with it. No pressure. If you don't get it on the first take, that's fine. But do bring your little sheet downstairs with your name and organization on it and hand it to the person who's doing the filming down there. We're only going to do those from about 10 to 3 today. And we're going to have people coming around pulling you to go down and do that video testimony. So don't be offended if they do that. So other than that, I think we are set to get going with our agenda today. We're going to start with one of my favorite people in the state, Chris Collerock over here, who I was talking about yesterday in our adventures to Savunga in Washington, D.C., and he's going to speak about our urban-rural connections today. So everybody welcome Chris.
Is it queued up? There we go. So, good morning. I think it's some kind of cruelty that I have to start this second day, first presentation in such slushy weather. So I'll make it a little brief and have more time for questions and answers. Some of you may know this intuitively already, so I apologize, but I want to get through some stories about urban and rural homelessness. Before I get started, I'm going to tell you that the single biggest thing that will affect homelessness funding in the state of Alaska is the U.S. Census. And getting our community members, our residents to respond to the census is the single biggest lever that we can pull. It is a 10-year process. It is a 10-year funding mechanism that we are currently pulling in $3.2 billion by way of. So anyone that you speak with, anyone that you're communicating with, anyone who asks you anything or trusts you, remind them to fill out the census, respond to the census. Why is this one so important? Well, the decennial census, they're actually going to count every single resident of small, hard-to-count villages in rural Alaska. We saw that on January 20th, starting in Tooksuk Bay. Literally, people are hired to carry around clipboards and iPads and get everyone in a village counted because we have such a hard-to-count population. Now, we like decennial census data because in the absence of the decennial or in between decennial censuses, we have ACS data that's plugged into our formulas. And once ACS data, which is a very small sample done by phone or the internet, which may be difficult in like Savunga maybe for people to respond to. Once ACS data was introduced into my formula when I was a CEO of a housing authority, my populations in the villages populations went down by 15%, all of them, which affected our share of federal funding. So the census is important. The decennial census is the most important. Please fill it out. Please go to alaskacounts.org and get some cool graphics to put on Facebook. Share it in a newsletter, something. But we've got to have our residents filling out the census. It is safe, it is important, and it is easy. Literally, the census this year is 10 questions, and it will help drive $3 billion of federal funding in Alaska. Okay, now that we get that out of the way, I'm going to talk a bit about urban and rural homelessness and a connection that I saw over the 3 years of working for the Bering Straits Regional Housing Authority centered in Nome. When I was there, we had quite a bit of migration between our villages and Nome, between Nome and Anchorage, and sometimes back from Anchorage to Nome, or maybe even Anchorage straight to Savunga, for example. And everyone in the housing business and the homelessness services community, service providers, we need to understand that if we are not addressing rural housing issues, our urban homelessness conundrum, our urban homeless population is going to continue to increase because our people are pulled out of villages for economic reasons, and they're pushed out of villages because of the lack of housing. That's just my theory. That's just what I saw for 3 years. I'm not an economist, but from stories I heard and paperwork being processed by my office, we know that people are moving, and we know that people are moving to try to find a job and to try to find a decent house. So, a little basic statistics. Homelessness by race in Anchorage is 43% Alaska Native American Indian. Our overall population in Anchorage is not 43% Alaska Native American Indian. And of those people that are homeless, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that not all of them were born in Anchorage. By that I mean our urban Native population were not born there and became homeless there. Many of our urban Native population that are homeless came from somewhere else, right? And for all of us outside of even the big hubs, you know this story. Has anyone seen something like this? Has anyone heard of ForgetMeNot? It's a sort of initiative, it's a grassroots thing by Samuel Johns to try to get people that are homeless in Anchorage on a plane back to a family. And it's a wonderful initiative, and unfortunately, it is sometimes seen as a systemic solution to our urban Native homeless population. And it's a shorthand, and then we hear this sentiment, can't we just ForgetMeNot them back home? The problem with that, and I'll show you in a bit, is that there are not enough homes to quote unquote send them all back, even if that wasn't sort of a racist and bigoted kind of thought in the first place. Granting that, there's still logistically not enough homes. So, being pushed out of their communities, rural residents, generally Alaska Native people, are being pushed out of their rural communities. And these are generally smaller communities, not the hubs. The hubs are the first wave of collecting our residents. But in Savunga, we have houses that up there on the upper left, I would guess is about 800 square feet. And there are 4 people who sleep in the kitchen of that house because it's so crowded. Down here on the bottom right, I guess that is maybe 900 square feet, and then an unheated addition on the left side of the house, and 14 people live there. And that is not unique. That is not uncommon. That's actually not even the worst. My very first meeting in a village in Brevig Mission, my very first time traveling outside of Nome for my work, was somebody got up and talked about how there is a 19-person household in Brevig Mission. 19 people sharing a house that you know is less than 1,200 square feet. So this is just a nice visualization that and it doesn't all look like this. Housing authorities are working very hard to build new homes and repair homes, renovate homes, but there are too many homes that look like this for our people to effectively stay. So what does it look like? Well, we can look at our overcrowding rates and our severe overcrowding rates. In basically the Chilista region, 40% of houses are overcrowded or severely overcrowded. And severe overcrowding is where there's more than 1.5 people per room. So you look at a bedroom, 2 bedrooms, that's 2 rooms, a living room, a kitchen, a dining room, and then I think even a bathroom counts. So even a small 800 square foot house, 2 bedrooms, we have 6 technical rooms, and we multiply that by 1.5 people, and that's 40% of our houses, 40% of the Chilista region's homes. Another way to think about whether there's housing is whether the housing is of certain quality. So in the Chilista region, 35% of homes do not have complete plumbing. In the Bering Straits, it's around 22%. So maybe the houses don't look like that picture I showed you, but maybe they also don't have a working toilet or a working faucet. They don't have water, like our presenter yesterday talked about, an amenity being water and sewer. And then, in addition to that, maybe the homes are not able to be lived in because they are 1-star rated. I mean, who's from the interior? Yeah, can you imagine living in a 1-star rated home this winter? I mean, especially this winter, right? So we've got a lot of homes that just either are in poor condition generally, like I showed you with pictures, that are overcrowded, that have incomplete plumbing, or that just can't hold any heat, and every dollar a family has goes into keeping warm. One of the stories behind this, I have stories of, an elder in a village told me that in the 2000s, we came to her village and built 20 homes. And then, in the 90s, we built 20 homes. And then about 10 years later, we came back and built 10 homes. And then that year, I was super proud of our organization for building 5 homes. And so she was alive and thinking about housing long enough to see this in action. Over the last 20 years, federal Indian housing funding has basically remained flat. That is the largest driver of housing dollars in rural Alaska. We also collected in urban areas, Cook Inlet Housing, IRHA, Tlingit Haida. But if you look at just compared to the consumer price index, we've lost about 30% of our ability to purchase anything. But, so that's 35%. In actual costs, a home in 1997 cost $127,000. I found that actually on paperwork in my office. If we went by the consumer price index, this year they should be paying $206,000 for a house. That's not what's happening. It's costing probably closer to $500,000 for a house. So even in the case of inflation, the cost of our homes are going up faster than that. Telecommunications, electronics, these things are cheaper. Furniture and clothing are about the same price. But rural housing costs are going up, and why? Well, it's because when we construct homes, our costs are driven by producer prices. They're driven by construction labor, which has gone up 56% since 1999. Construction material is up 70% since 1999, and air and water freight are up 50 and 60%. So we are just losing huge amounts of dollars to the cost of things going up over time. And our Indian Housing Block Grant, Native American Housing Block Grant is not keeping up with inflation. It's not even keeping up with consumer inflation, much less producer inflation. And it's not that there's no federal money for housing. It's not that there's no federal money for Alaska. It's not that there's no federal money anywhere. Over that same rough period of time, federal spending in Alaska went up 40%. So there's money. It's just not being spent on our Indian housing programs, right? Okay, now, if our populations were stable or if they were falling, this wouldn't be such a big deal. But our populations are going up everywhere in our small villages. Let's think about the state of Alaska since 1970. The state population's gone up about 100%. We have about double the number of people that we did 50 years ago. The same can be true for villages in the Bering Straits region. Savunga's about twice as big as it was 50 years ago, and that's generally true for most of our villages, most of the Bering Straits villages. But the difference between Anchorage's population doubling, Alaska's population doubling, is that since 1970 there's a big project called the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. There's money being pumped out of the ground. There's a large economy in Anchorage, Fairbanks, and Juneau, right? Or places close to that. In Savunga, I mean, their population's increasing without the concomitant economic growth as the rest of the state. And we're getting bigger, and we're moving. So my village, my ancestral village, Makoriak, out in western Alaska, there's the same number of tribal members in Makoriak as there are Bethel, as there are Anchorage. So over time, we're getting bigger and we're moving. And I'm one of those people. Really related to this is the pull. So we just talked about the push of people outside. Housing conditions are rough. There might not even be housing because and so they're overcrowded. So there's the pull, and that's money and jobs. It's ability to actually pay for things. So these are old figures. This is we'll get some updated figures here with the new census. But in one area that I'm familiar with, 1,000 households in the Bering Straits earn less than 50% of the statewide median income. That's a third of the households. That's a third of the native households earn less than 50%. 10% of households in the Bering Straits spend more than half of their money on housing. And I love this one. I should have connected this to the last slide. So in Savunga, the per capita income's $8,000. And in Anchorage, the per capita income's $37,000, right? Massive change. Part of it is driven by what jobs are there, what economic base is there. I was surprised to learn that there's 155 jobs in Savunga. But let's talk about what a job means. So when Raven has an agent in the village, they actually have 2 to split it up. And then Bering Air might have 2 agents in a village. And so there are 4 jobs, but they work 2 to 3 hours a day, and they share it with somebody else. So these are 4 jobs that really have 8 to 12 hours a week of work, and then that starts filling in the economic picture of how they can earn money, how people can earn money. And then we move. So there's no housing. The housing there Many of it has problems. There are few jobs. And so what we do is our people are moving. They move from villages to the hubs. They move from hubs to an urban center. Or they may go back and forth multiple times. And especially in the last few years, we've seen and we've heard stories of people moving to Anchorage, really figuring that they can get a job and afford things, or moving to Nome and thinking they can get a job and afford things, when the most basic apartment in Nome is $1,250 a month. And so someone working an entry-level job is basically spending everything they've got on rent. And then plus they have to figure out childcare, plus they have to figure out getting around town. And what happens, I know this happens because it happened to my mother when we moved to Anchorage from Wasilla, is people spend so much of their income working to live, working so hard just to keep a roof over their head, and eventually they get tired. And so they move. They move back home, they move back in with family, they may move back from Anchorage back to Sawunga. In our case, we moved from my mom's first apartment in Boniface back into my grandparents' house. But it happens. She just got exhausted trying to keep everything together. So this gives me a time to think about, well, we want people to be successful where they want to be, right? We don't want people to be pushed out of their homes because they don't have a quality home. We don't want people to be pulled out because they don't have a job, right? They don't have enough earned income. And why is because when people are moving from Gamble to Nome to Anchorage, there's not a support system every time they move. Every time people are moving, they're one sick child away from losing the job and one sick child away from losing an apartment. And that happens when people strike out and try to get a job and try to get a better house in Anchorage, a better apartment. And I want to be clear on this point. I'm not saying everyone who moves from a village to a hub or a hub to Anchorage is going to be unsuccessful. The vast majority of people who migrate around the state, people who are moving for jobs, the vast majority are very successful. They hold a job, they're able to hold an apartment, they do all right. But there are enough people who do not do all right that this is a systemic problem for us. So, because we're moving, because we move multiple times, because our people are going from villages to hubs to urban centers, maybe back to the village, it's not a set in stone try it once and done. Our population moves, and we have stresses on housing and homelessness services in Anchorage because some of those folks are unsuccessful in some of their moves. The big thing is this: if we don't have a connection between our urban housing and homelessness policies and rural housing and homelessness policies, our efforts in urban Alaska will fail. Our efforts to address homelessness, especially among Alaska Native American Indian people, will fail because enough people are moving and just a tiny percentage are being unsuccessful and finding themselves in a state of homelessness. So if we're not addressing rural housing challenges, our urban centers will still have a pipeline of people who become houseless. So anyone working on housing policy must include rural Alaska. Otherwise, it will be an abject failure. I think that might be it. I apologize for starting our sleety, windy day with it's a tough thing. It's a hard thing to write it, and it's a hard thing to give it. But is there any questions, any comments? How am I doing on time, actually? Am I keeping you too long? Oh, no. This isn't fun, I understand, but
When you talk about writing the policies together, can you maybe give us some specific examples, since all of us do have the opportunity to go speak with legislators? Because I don't know exactly what that looks like, or how to say that.
yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I think some of the easiest and most popular ways for us to help housing conditions in rural Alaska are basic things like weatherization funding. Because it's so much easier to weatherize a house rather than build new. If a house is able, instead of being a one-star house, if that house has some weatherization and has some efficiency, then people can actually afford to live there. In Savunga, in the dead of winter, I've had people tell me they spend $1,500 on fuel oil. $1,500 on fuel oil for a place where the per capita income's $8,000, right? So weatherization is a key program that will preserve housing stock. It's not a panacea today, but it is a long-term item that keeps housing in existence. And other AHFC-supported programs, housing programs. The Alaska Coalition and the Anchorage Coalition work together, share policy. I think that's some specific things, but I think just in general, as program managers, as service providers, just remember that rural Alaska's there, and people are going to come from rural Alaska. So let's not be myopic in only proposing solutions that work for Anchorage residents, right?
Hello? Chris, thank you very much for sharing. Hearing and understanding from the point of view of one who's gone through it is always far better than guessing and wondering. So as a mid-urban area in the Mat-Su Valley, we've viewed this as we're welcoming and we're helping and we're trying to find space and room, and we're wondering, well, why is our Alaska Native participation a little bit higher than we thought it was going to be? And now we understand a little bit more. But also, I think you've done a very good job of explaining the pull and the push. And that will make it easier for us as we work with the different populations to perhaps be a little more understanding, a little more supportive. So thank you for your time this morning. Where can we go to get some of the data that you've shared so that we can use the numbers as well as the stories to help people understand?
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I'm glad that this is helpful in some way. So AHFC, the colorful graphs that I used at the beginning are actually straight from AHFC's Housing Needs Assessment in 2018. And their Tableau visualizations, I love them because they're colorful. So this is just straight off, I just hit download the picture and print. And I like it because I can slap this in a document and just show it instead of having to write out 2 to 3 paragraphs of words. And we all know, regulators, politicians, visual is the best conveyor of information. So this is AHFC's Housing Needs Assessment. The other things are basic Census from Fact Finder lookups on like Savunga and Bering Straits.
Thank you. Doreen Schenkenberger, Partners for Progress. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was really interesting. I just want to make a quick comment. I'm not surprised at all at the overrepresentation of Alaska Natives with regards to homelessness. We have high statistics in almost every social ill area there is. I want to remind everybody, or just in case people don't know, our prison populations are also overrepresented by Alaska Native people, and they face real barriers to housing when they get out. So I would just ask all of us to think about that as we're thinking about policies and procedures and ways to get people housed, all people, regardless of background. Thanks.
Thank you.
I just want to mention, being from Bethel Hub community, we've probably serviced over 200 unique individuals just this year in our emergency shelter, and all but one identified as Alaska Native. A lot of those individuals are not originally from Bethel, but are a product of this migration. But as part of our intake, we have a conversation about, where did you come from, where do you want to be? And almost predominantly, everybody wants to be housed in their home village. They don't want to be Anchorage's problem. They don't want to be Bethel's problem. But like you say, they're being pushed. When we go and meet with funders, funders say, well, the problem's predominantly in Anchorage and Fairbanks, and that's where we're focusing our efforts. And it's just getting the message that if they would focus the efforts where we were, you wouldn't have that mass migration, and your percentage of Alaska Native unhoused in Anchorage and Fairbanks would actually go down.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly true. And it's not that we can in 1 year solve rural homelessness or we have one policy. But yeah, that's exactly right. If we don't have funders engaged in rural housing policy, that spigot is not, that spigot's open. They're gonna come, yeah. And I'm really glad that your intake includes where do you wanna be? That's a wonderful thing to ask, and kind of feels a little empowering even, in a tough time.
This I can talk with you personally as well, but I have two questions. With the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Program, I've taken a lot of time outside of representing my region to try to reach out to other places.
Yeah.
And so if you are interested in representing or suggesting other people I could contact to represent, I know that I can't fully represent the Alaska Native population, so I've been speaking and bringing it up in our meetings that we should reach out, and people have started connecting me to people, and then I'll meet someone like at a coffee shop. Oh, my family's from St. Paul, and that's when I started learning about the overcrowding or like lack of mental health services getting out to some of these places. So the first question is, do you have any ideas who I could connect with, and we can talk about that afterwards.
Yeah.
The second is that of course, advocating for housing and everything is very important, and this is more of a personal curiosity, but it seems that also jobs need to be available at home. But if you have any ideas, I'm curious of how to ethically bring jobs without forcing a different culture. Because it makes me nervous to start saying, hey, we need jobs somewhere, and then someone will be like, well, cool, you can work on the oil pipeline, or you could do this thing that shatters your own culture. So if you have any ideas, I'm curious.
I think that's a wonderful question, and I'm going to preface it with I'm not going to be the best person to answer that, and part of it is, so my grandfather, my grandmother was born in a partially subterranean sod house, right? She's only 70 years old, so like change is fast, like time came at us fast. And then my grandfather did not teach any of us Chupik because he had problems with his English. And then for a very long time we lived in Wasilla, and we were just very suburban and, not too native. So it's tough for me to think about how we have an economy without destroying our culture, because it's like I'm half an example of some of that destruction. So, but I think that's an important conversation starter. I like it. I like it a lot.
Hi, I'm Terry, and I've experienced houselessness, but mostly in the North 48 in Portland, Seattle. And I relate to this information because I was really trying to go beyond my economic means here in Anchorage. So I went to Seattle, and with a plan to do better. And what happened is my structures of my plan fell apart, and so I ended up homeless. So I relate to this story a lot. And this is my thinking. I do a lot of thinking about our history, my own generational trauma, European. And I think, wow, isn't it what happened with people coming over here, refugees from Europe, And like we have this repeated pattern going on about not having enough resources, and then not behaving sustainably, and then having everything not there, and repeated assaults on culture that's in harmony with our place. So, I'm trying to connect with how do we do this collectively, because I feel like this is too small of a conversation to talk about the problem we need to address. Housing is the obvious thing for us to see, but the general public doesn't see that as an obvious answer. We have a lot of outdated ideas about how we should be with each other, and not a lot of agreement around that, about how we need to be with each other, and also pay attention to our environment that grows the trees to make our houses. How do I help each of us remember that long story and have this compassion going? And like that needs to be a story that comes out of this room into the general public, neighbor by neighbor. That's a question about how do we get out of this box of being a housing and homelessness, and thinking about this big picture of like we have a systemic craziness we're dealing with. I just feel like as human beings, we're just kind of crazy right now. In all our relationships, we're not dealing with the proper justice in a general, everyday sense. Our sense of ethics that I feel like born within our bodies with each other is violated on a daily basis. How do we live with that? And housing is one of those places where we respond to it, and I know we're all doing our best with this. This is overwhelming. Every day it's overwhelming. So it's not an answer. I just say, wow, we keep doing this over and over and over for thousands of years. And I'm sorry I got brought here. I really am. It's a beautiful place, and I think the people that are here are beautiful. Thinking to hide up people, I'm not sure it's just right for here, this place here. But I have to honor these people who were here before the Europeans came, before the Russians came, and that their place was a beautiful way, and all this pain that Europeans brought and the Russian people brought disturbed that peace. Just apologize for that. I don't have answers right now. This work's tiring, and I commend all of you for doing the work you do and taking care of. Just want a really bigger boxes all to play in. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there are some common themes in some of your sentiments. I think expanding our thinking beyond our little box is something that we can apply in many little boxes. And so for an example, how we talk about housing and homeless advocacy, I think this is a little example of us being a little bit less in a box, just being together, right? So I don't know how to address all of what you're saying, but I do agree that there is quite a bit of silo. There's some expansive thinking we could do, and this maybe is one little teeny example of that. Okay. So here's the disclaimer that I should have done at first. This is just my non-scientific observation from my 3 years of work up in Nome. My day job, I'm Director of Public Policy for Cook Inlet Housing. And you can call me at 793-3710. I didn't put my email on there because I imagine somehow, some way this is visible, and if you put your email on the internet, then suddenly you don't have email anymore. It's just gone. So, but I'm very happy to talk with any of you. I might have even remembered business cards, and if not, you all know Brian and or Jasmine. So, but part of what I enjoy about my job is being able to talk to people. This isn't very fun for me, but actually talking to people is better. So, yeah. Are we good on time? Are we? All right. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and hope we have a good rest of the day.